20 hours into this game, and I can't help but think to myself, man, Visions of Mana deserved better. Was it the lack of advertisements, or perhaps the neglect of the Nintendo Switch platform? I don't know. I'll leave that up to the idiot armchair economists over on Twitter. What I am here to talk about, though, is a little gem of a game you may have missed. I'm here to give you my impressions of Visions of Mana. The very first thing you're greeted with when starting a fresh playthrough of Visions of Mana is a beautiful cutscene. The camera flies through the sky and over a canyon town as a fairy with an ear-grating voice narrates what's happening below.
The Alm is rejecting her duties.
In this part of the game, we take the role of Orin, a long-haired young man who is leading his wife through a twilight-stricken town. The reason they're running is complicated to say the least. You see, Orin's wife Liza was chosen to be the Alm of Guju. An Alm is an important role within the world of Visions of Mana. Every 4 years, villages throughout the world send one Alm to represent their village and the corresponding element to the mana tree. This isn't just a vacation to some fancy tree though. The Alms offer up their souls for continued support of the elemental spirits. This means they die. Well, Liza was selected to be the Alm of this village, and that means she too would perish at the end of her journey.
No, you do.
Of course we do. But we can't give up our happiness. We've gone through so much to be together. And you should know that.
Orin, however, refuses to let that happen and decides that he can run away with her. This is the prologue portion of the game, and it will introduce players to the basic controls and combat. Eventually, the two have to fight against a golem. Orin and Liza defeat it, and all seems great. That is, until Liza gets way too stoned and cannot continue. At this point, the game cuts to the real protagonist, Val, the new Soul Guard. Soul Guards are charged with making sure the Alms make it to the mana tree in one piece, so they can die. After flirting with his girlfriend Hina a bit...
Well, I see someone's excited about becoming a Soul Guard. Or is it nerves?
the fairy comes to town and names her the Alm of Fire.
I accept.
My goodness!
Wow! Congratulations! Congratulations!
After some story shit and some other preparations, the player can finally leave town and begin the journey. Areas in this game are somewhat like a Xenoblade Chronicles game, large open areas with plenty of enemies as well as optional content. However, unlike Xenoblade, Visions of Mana has invisible walls, some of which are more noticeable than others. This is somewhat unfortunate because Visions of Mana does have a pretty big emphasis on platforming, as well as some light collectathon spice. Each zone is littered with chests, random items, currency, and more. At first, platforming and movement feel a little bit clunky. I'm not sure if this is the animations or the physics. It might honestly be a combination of both. Jumping doesn't have much forward momentum, but air dashes fix that, and you can also air dash multiple times in one jump. While running, you can vault over small objects, which is nice, but again, it doesn't feel as smooth as it should be. Another oddity worth noting is that when you press the run button while swimming in water, you turn into a flesh jet ski. I bring all of these things up, but I'm going to be frank with you, after a couple hours, all of this stuff became a non-issue. Walking down the path, Val encounters his first monster, the horrid Rabbite. Throughout your journey in Visions of Mana, you'll have to dispatch various adorable enemies. Most early fights like this boil down to button mashing. But once you hit mid-game, the fights become just a little bit more tactical. Spellcasting and item usage becomes a lot more prevalent, as your options are vastly expanded upon through the elemental vessels, which not only bolster your moveset, but determine your character classes. We'll discuss classes and elemental vessels a bit more in depth later. After continuing our adventure, Val and Hina come upon Orin, who is in the area doing some shit. Here, a short but thematically important conversation takes place.
You must really like the world we live in to fight so hard to keep it this way.
Of course! We gotta protect the spirits and all our family and friends. This world is all we've got.
You sound like it's not the same for you, Orin.
Me? Well, it's hard to say.
Once that's over, he disappears, leaving a piece of candy. Soon we find ourselves in the Airy Passage. This is where the presentation of this game really stood out to me. The graphics are just already beautiful, the character models are expressive and smooth, and they're really just so full of life. But where this game really wowed me was its architecture and terrain design. The world is bright and cheery, and the game looks like a storybook come to life. If you've played any of the previous Mana games, you'd see that the tone and whimsy of those games remains present here. A lot of games lose aesthetics that made them so memorable when they switch from 2D to 3D, and it's great to see that Visions of Mana didn't succumb to this. I guess you could argue that Dawn of Mana was the first 3D Mana game, and it kept the aesthetics, but I never played that game and I heard it sucks. If I hit 500 subscribers within 1 week of this upload, I will review Dawn of Mana. While we're on topic of visual aesthetics, let's segue into audio aesthetic. Visions of Mana has a pretty decent soundtrack. The two standout tracks to me were the Etern City theme.
Keep them coming! Look at the view from here. It's lovely. So majestic.
Now, if only the storm wasn't raging, it'd be perfect.
It's a very cold and atmospheric track. It encapsulates that feeling of loneliness and abandonment. I also really like the boss music. This is simply because it feels so heavily inspired by Secret of Mana's boss theme. The sound design is decent, I really don't have any complaints here either. I'll say that the elemental effects in particular feel very bubbly and crisp. So finally we come to the village of dragon people, Longren. This is where we meet best girl Karina. Karina is angry that no one respects her, but they also want her to put all the effort to call the fairy to town. You see, each village has some sort of ritual which they use to call the fairy to town, which then the fairy names the Alm. In Longren, it's to die some shit. Karina desperately wants to be chosen as the Alm so she can get out of town, but everyone constantly puts her down. Wow, I wonder why she wants to leave. Her response is to refuse to assist with the ritual, and since everyone else in the village apparently sucks at dying, the fairy ain't coming. Eventually, after a bunch of bullshit, Val and Hina manage to convince Karina to try to die by sucking at the dying process. The fairy appears and Karina decides that she will visit the mana spirit Sylphid to call him a bitch. So now, with Karina in party, the three travel to meet Sylphid. It is here where we get our first elemental vessel, as well as unlock our first classes. The classes are related to the elemental vessels you'll be coming across throughout the game. Each character has 9 classes. These classes affect the weapons, stats, passives, and moves available to said character. These bonuses can then be expanded upon further by unlocking more nodes throughout the elemental plot with elemental points. You'll get elemental points by finding special rocks throughout the world that are only activated once you have the corresponding vessel. Also, you get some points upon leveling up. When switching classes, the stats and passives won't stay, but the moves are more or less permanent, so spending some points in a class may be worth it if you want a specific move, or not. It really depends how you want to build a character. Soon, the party comes upon an uncrossable gap. Luckily, each elemental vessel also has some sort of effect outside of combat. In this instance, Sylphid's boomerang can create a massive gust, allowing for vertical movement, as well as pushing boulders in the air and making them into platforms to jump on. It's not long after this before we face off against this game's first proper boss. Yeah, this guy ain't even tough on hard mode. Other than being built like a brick shithouse, this mantis asshole isn't really a difficult boss. The footage you're seeing is actually normal difficulty. The hard mode footage was fucked during recording. This also gave me a chance to replay the first parts of the game and see how the difficulty has changed it. And yeah, my main takeaway was the enemies just are more damage spongier and they hit a little bit harder. After Val and crew save Sylphid, he rewards Karina by choosing her as the Alm of Wind, killing her by proxy. So the crew continues through the mountains, eventually coming to a bridge that cannot be crossed. So they have to go through the desolate town of Etern. Etern was the village of the moon before they failed to produce an alm one year and therefore they ate shit and died. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, if a village neglects its duty to send an alm to the mana tree, it gets decimated. Here we meet Morley.
Don't move. What business do you have in Etern?
Who steps in to stop the party before they get zapped by some shit by entering the city at the wrong time. Morley would be my favorite character if it was not for one thing. He's a furry. I don't like furries. He requests Val and the others to help him find an item that he's been searching for years. They find it 2 seconds later. The moon becomes full and they can now enter the city. Then Morley suddenly age regresses into a child and we see what happens to the city. I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm trying to stay vague here. Some shit happens and Morley is named Alm of the Moon and can now possibly save his home. Morley is the most worldly of the group, having lived a nomadic lifestyle once he became an adult. And I'm gonna be real with you, he also has the most interesting backstory from everything I've seen so far. Finally, we move on to the next area. But first, we see a cactus, and he gives us a diary page. To be 100% transparent, I completely avoided this content. Before I'm able to save the game, I run into the deadliest enemy of early game, blue oozes. Up until now, all enemies have been a cakewalk. These dudes are brutal, because they can cause the snowman status effect. This turns a character into an immobile snowman, and they can still take damage. Also, it's an area effect ability that lingers. They also split from each other, making more potential to be hit by that shit. After some time manipulation using the Luna Globe, we finally arrive at Fallow Steppe. Here we get access to our mount, Big Doggos. They are super nice if you want to move through the map fast. I will say with the amount of optional platforming, I don't really see them as necessary. The game does have a pretty robust fast travel system, as is. After arriving at the port town, Karina bumps into some fat fuck, who then pins his lost key on her. She is promptly arrested, and we are tasked with finding the key to win her freedom back. The key was in a random chest in town. I don't know, the dude was thinking about Big Macs or something. After finding the key, Orin appears again and swipes the key. Then he makes Fatty look stupid by planting it on his huge squirrel butt.
I think it's a key. Is this what you were making people look all over town for?
With Best Girl absolved of her non-existent crimes, we are free to continue. I'm doing some side quests first. There are side quests earlier in Longren, but I forgot to mention them. And that's because most, if not all, side quests are inconsequential and generic. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I would rather take 5 or 10 interesting side quests that have an effect on the world and are multifaceted than 50 monster calling missions or find an item and bring it to me stuff. Those suck. Unfortunately, Visions of Mana doesn't do that. They might be worth the rewards, but none of them really felt important. After finishing up these side quests, we board the boat and head for the other continent, so we can receive some blessing from the Queen and meet up with the other alms. Then the boat gets attacked by a kraken. Unbeknownst to it, I was hungry for some sushi.
Damn it. Damn it. Damn it. Damn it.
Also, this is the end of Chapter 1. From here, the game expands out further. The zones become larger, the options in combat become more numerous, and the story starts to ramp up. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of combat, I want to discuss my thoughts on the story. Now, obviously, I haven't beat the game yet, so I can't give my full thoughts on it, but here are my thoughts so far. It's not on the level of other JRPGs when it comes to a complicated narrative, and some of the dialogue is pretty hammy at best, but it hasn't detracted from my personal experience. There's a certain morbidness with this narrative, and it's only made more interesting to me because it is absolutely juxtaposed by the cutesy, whimsical design of the characters in the world. We are literally playing as a man who is marching off to get his girlfriend killed with a smile on his face.
You sure you want to do this? You can't be together after you reach the mana tree, you know.
What do you mean? We can't not go to the mana tree. It's the duty of the alms to rejuvenate the flow of mana by sacrificing their souls. There's nothing else to be done if we want a future for humanity. Plus, I'm the Soul Guard, and proud of it too.
However, as the game progresses, we do see some of the characters having second thoughts on this whole cycle of sacrifice.
I realized I'm more weak-willed than I thought.
Hina?
If I'm being completely honest, I'm scared.
Scared of what?
Completing my duty as the Alm and sacrificing my soul. It's terrifying. When we set out on this journey, I hadn't really thought about the consequences of becoming the Alm.
It remains to be seen whether Val and friends push back against the nature of their world, or if they fall in line, ultimately accepting that they are unable to change their reality. So I mentioned combat earlier, but there are still more things I want to go over since it's a pretty integral part of the experience of Visions of Mana. At the beginning of the game, the combat is kind of ass. The options are limited, the movesets are underwhelming, and it's just not great. However, as things start ramping up, you unlock more elemental vessels, and you start figuring out what kind of build you want to do, and things get more interesting from there. I didn't get too in-depth with the elemental vessels and how they work in battle, but to sum it up, elemental vessels have an ability you can activate on cooldown. A couple of examples I can think of off the top of my head are the Undeed's Flask, which is basically a jar that shoots slurp juice at everyone, and arguably the greatest vessel being the Luna Globe, which creates a bubble of time distortion that has the same effect on enemies as decades of cannabis abuse has had on the brain of Ethan is Online. These effects can be augmented with the Elemental Break. This requires characters to have at least 5 nodes unlocked on that specific elemental vessel's elemental plot. To execute this, the vessel obviously can't be on cooldown, and the Elemental Break gauge over here must be maxed. Elemental breaks are arena-wide effects that can turn the tide of a battle. I should also mention class strikes too. I describe them as an ultimate move or a limit break per se. These are independent from the vessel themselves, and they can be activated whenever the class strike bar is maxed. Also, by the way, before I forget to mention this, both the class strike and elemental break gauge are shared between party members. I nearly forgot about the ring menu. This will be a core part of combat. Every character has an assortment of moves they can learn from either their mana plot or items found throughout the world. These are pretty much your spells. You'll probably be popping them off pretty frequently in late game. There is a small problem with the ring menu. Sometimes it fucks up and the item or spell just won't activate. It helps to have your character be completely stationary at the start of the action. This is hands down the worst bug in the game. It is somewhat avoidable, but it is noticeable.
When a player isn't actively using a party member in combat, that character is played by the computer. The AI is not great, but it usually isn't retarded either. Emphasis on usually. You do have a say in roughly how the character operates. In my experience, allowing them to use most of their MP and items makes them perform significantly better.
The only thing I didn't like about combat was the boundary that appears during it. To escape a fight, you basically have to hump the boundary wall until a countdown finishes. The problem appears when it's a bit too small and there's several enemies.
It makes the fights feel less immersive, and it kinda cramps the momentum.
Alright, before I sum it up, the last thing I want to cover is the performance of Visions of Mana. This is particularly important since we will likely never see any substantial updates after launch. Netease, the parent company of Uka, shuttered the studio the day of the game's launch. Wow. As if I didn't need more of a reason to hate communists. Visions of Mana ran pretty steady for me, only dipping noticeably during cutscenes, which were programmed to run at 30 FPS anyway. There were occasional stutters, but these were infrequent enough to not be a problem. The load screens were, however, a bit too common for my liking, and could take longer than what I'd prefer. I also ran into occasions where upon boot the title screen took 5 minutes to load. It happened twice and it seemed pretty random. I have no idea what was going on with that. Other than these issues, there aren't many things to note. I didn't see any obvious bugs or run into any game-breaking glitches aside from the ring menu bug, and that one can be mostly mitigated by anyone with an IQ above a room temperature.
I'll be real with you guys. This is actually pretty solid for a modern gaming launch. It's very unfortunate that I have to say that.
There are tons of other details about Visions of Mana that I haven't gone over, but this video is long enough, so I'm gonna call it here.
Unless Visions of Mana somehow manages to rapidly deteriorate in the second half, I think it's pretty much set to be one of, if not my favorite releases in 2024. And 2024 has been one hell of a year for gaming.
I know it's not super impressive in terms of boundary-pushing graphics, and it's not bringing anything new to the gaming medium, let alone the series. The start is slow, the writing's not the greatest, and I'll be honest, I'm very much saddened by the lack of co-op, which the series has been primarily known for. But none of those things have hurt the experience enough to cause any lasting damage. The combat is fun, the character customization is solid, the visual presentation is just beautiful, and the wonderful music overcomes all of those flaws.
Visions of Mana feels like a game that was made to be fun, and I really, really feel like more people should give it a try. Also, Netease can eat my ass.